Hello, Wide Real News followers. Thank you for joining us today. We have a significant story from Mozambique, where recent events have drawn intense national and international attention. Before we dive into the details, please subscribe to our channel to stay updated with in-depth, accurate news on stories that matter. In the wake of Mozambique's disputed general elections on October 9, 2024, the country has experienced a surge of political tension, marked by widespread protests and a severe government crackdown. Amnesty International, along with other human rights organizations, has raised alarm over the violent tactics employed by security forces to suppress dissent, warning of the serious impact this has on fundamental human rights in Mozambique. Development Diaries reported that Mozambican security forces escalated the response to post-election protests with deadly force, resulting in over 20 deaths and leaving hundreds more injured or detained. Reports indicate that police used tear gas, rubber bullets, and even live ammunition to disperse peaceful protests, sparking nationwide and international condemnation. These actions, human rights advocates argue, reflect a government prioritizing the suppression of opposition voices over fundamental freedoms such as the rights to peaceful assembly and freedom of expression. The disputed election results, declared by the Comissão Nacional de Eleições (CNE), handed victory to the ruling party, Frelimo, which claimed 195 parliamentary seats and saw its presidential candidate, Daniel Chapo, secure 70% of the vote. However, Venancio Mondlane, the opposition candidate from Partido Otomista pelo Desenvolvimento da Mozambique, Podemos, has rejected these results, claiming widespread irregularities. The CNE has so far only provided tabulations at the provincial level, while Podemos released detailed results sheets from 70% of the country's 25,000 polling stations, raising serious questions about the accuracy and transparency of the official tally. The response to the election and the ensuing protests has been severe. Amnesty International noted that the police have even gone so far as to launch tear gas into people's homes, an action that many observers believe has crossed a line. The presence of war-grade weapons, including rifles and armored trucks, adds a chilling layer to the government's efforts to control the unrest. Such extreme measures, human rights organizations argue, not only breach international human rights law but also instill fear, making citizens less likely to participate in the democratic process. Lucia da Luz Ribeiro, president of Mozambique's Constitutional Council, recently requested the CNE to provide the results sheets from every polling station, the demand seen as a potential moment of reckoning for both the CNE and Frelimo. This call for transparency has only intensified the resolve of protesters, who continue to gather across various provinces despite a powerful security crackdown. These demonstrations, decentralized and relentless, spread through major cities such as Maputo, Matola, Nampula, and Bara, as well as the northern provinces of Cabo Delgado, Nyasa, and Zambezia. November 7, 2024, was anticipated as a pivotal day in this post-election turmoil. Venancio Mondlane, who had fled to South Africa due to death threats, called for a day of revolutionary consolidation. This call included general strikes, stayaways, and street protests. Videos and images of the protests have flooded social media, capturing scenes of large crowds chanting slogans like "People in Power" and "Save Mozambique." In some instances, police and military personnel allowed protesters to pass through barricades, signaling a potential undercurrent of sympathy within the ranks for the opposition's cause. The protests, however, have not been without further tragedy. With reports that more than 25 lives have been lost, and with at least 149 people still detained, Mozambique's political crisis is fast escalating into a humanitarian one. Activists and ordinary citizens alike have expressed fears of further repression, noting that restrictions on internet access and social media have curtailed their ability to organize and communicate. These measures have further eroded trust in the government, raising concerns about the state's commitment to upholding fundamental democratic principles. International response has become increasingly critical as Mozambique's government appears emboldened to use violent methods to retain power and intimidate opposition voices. Development Diaries, alongside Amnesty International, has called on President Filipe Nyusi's administration to cease its violent crackdown and respect human rights, especially the right to freedom of expression, peaceful assembly, and association. They have also called on regional bodies such as the Southern African Development Community, SADC, and the African Union to take a firm stance against these violations. In Mozambique, the struggle for justice, freedom, and prosperity seems to be paid for with the lives of unarmed protesters and the courage of individuals across the nation, students, syndicates, lawyers, doctors, urban youth, and rural communities alike. However, the scale of repression hints at a broader, systemic issue within the ruling party. Frelimo, once a liberation movement, thus dominated Mozambique's political landscape since the end of the civil war in 1992. Many citizens and international observers believe that Frelimo's grip on power has stifled political plurality, worsened corruption, and marginalized northern provinces. These grievances have fueled an Islamist insurgency in Cabo Delgado, a resource-rich region, which the government initially attempted to quell with foreign mercenaries before inviting military assistance from Rwanda and SADC. Despite these interventions, the insurgency has drained state resources, with estimates suggesting that Mozambique has spent over $1.5 billion on the conflict since 2018. The economic strain has been exacerbated by mismanagement of the country's natural resources, including vast deposits of gas and critical minerals. Instead of benefiting the populace, revenues from these resources have largely enriched political elites, leaving Mozambique among the world's poorest nations, ranking 185th on the Human Development Index. Frustration with the government is compounded by pervasive corruption scandals and growing poverty. Youth unemployment has surged to 36% in urban areas, and the government has struggled to pay civil service and military wages since August 2023. Ordinary citizens increasingly suspect that Frelimo has siphoned off state funds for personal gain, leaving the country mired in debt, poverty, and violence. Despite threats and the government's heavy-handed tactics, the protests have continued unabated. As of November 7th, over 100,000 protesters were reportedly mobilizing across the country to converge with Mondlane, who initially planned to return from South Africa but later decided against it. This decision did little to deter the protesters, who continue to march with demands for political change and accountability. Meanwhile, President Nyusi's plane, identified as FAM-002, has made several flights to Pemba, reportedly transporting top Frelimo officials to the northern regions under the protection of trusted troops and allied Rwandan forces. The depth of public anger against Frelimo's rule echoes the histories of other authoritarian liberation movements in southern Africa, such as the MPLA in Angola and ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe. Mozambique's opposition parties and civil society groups argue that, despite the official end of one-party rule in 1992, Frelimo has maintained tight control over state institutions, reducing transparency and eroding press freedom. Mozambique's current crisis reflects a critical moment for its democracy. With the country's young population increasingly frustrated by corruption, economic inequality, and political repression, the calls for change are growing louder. If Frelimo continues on its current path, experts warn that Mozambique may face further political instability, which could impact not only its citizens but the broader southern African region. As Mozambique's situation unfolds, international attention will be key in pressuring the government to respect human rights and democratic values. Organizations like Amnesty International and Development Diaries have already urged the international community to hold Mozambique accountable for its actions, calling on regional leaders within SADC and the African Union to intervene. The coming weeks may determine the trajectory of Mozambique's political future. For now, the voices of thousands of protesters, standing in defiance against a government unwilling to relinquish control, carry a powerful message, a demand for accountability, freedom, and a true representation of their will. Mozambique's journey toward justice and equality is far from over, and the outcome of this struggle will resonate deeply across the region. Thank you for staying with us on this important story. Don't forget to subscribe to Wide Real News for comprehensive updates on developments from Mozambique and beyond. Your support helps us bring you truthful, unbiased coverage of the stories that matter most. Stay informed, stay empowered.